Was it a ghost? I highly doubt it. It was real. I'm not really sure, but I'm going to share an experience where I was almost abducted. It happened when I was in the 4th grade. My hometown is really rural, and to get to school I needed to walk through this long, dark tunnel. It was about 30 meters long. I gotta tell you, that tunnel was so creepy. The sign at the entrance was rusted and old, and the lighting in the tunnel was so dim you could barely see where you were going. On top of all that, I didn't have any classmates who lived near me, so I would always walk alone. It sucked. It wasn't too bad in the mornings, but on those darker autumn and winter nights, it was very unnerving. When I was in the tunnel, I would talk to myself or sing out loud not to be scared. I often quick walked, and sometimes I ran through there. I must have sounded really weird for any passers-by, or anyone with their car windows open. One afternoon, I think it was about 5 p.m., I left school later than usual that day. I remember it was late in autumn. It was already getting dark out when I left the school gates. I was thinking of how I had to go through the tunnel and how it was making me anxious and a little depressed. I wanted to ask the teacher to call my mum to come and get me, but my pride wouldn't have that. I knew that I would just have to face up to things and walk home alone. The usual roads I walked down felt all the more eerie because it was darker out. I decided to sing one of my favorite songs out loud in a stupid voice to break the tension. It worked, but then I got a bit confused by what the hell I was doing. I quit singing when I arrived just outside of the tunnel. It seemed darker than ever. The wind echoed through the tunnel. It seemed louder than ever. I thought that I heard the distant sound of an animal. I really didn't want to go in that tunnel. But I had to get home. If I wasn't home soon, I'd be in trouble. I mean, I could literally hear my mother telling me I wasn't allowed to walk home alone again if I couldn't face up going through the tunnel when it was dark. I was stuck, like a statue in place, on the edge of a dilemma. I was staring into the tunnel's mouth, thinking, will I? Won't I? I must have stood there like that, still, for about 2 minutes or so. I came back to my senses when I heard a car approaching. Eventually, I saw the headlights of that car illuminate the tunnel ahead of me. I shuffled off to the side to allow the car enough room to pass by. I expected it to chug straight by, but it didn't. The car pulled up alongside me, and I heard a voice ask, "Are you okay?" I turned around instinctively, and to be honest, I was a little surprised. I wasn't usually ever spoken to when I was on the way home. I faced the owner of the car to see the woman unwinding the passenger side window. Although I was unable to see her face clearly, I could tell it was a woman just by the voice. The bright headlights of her car obscured my view. "Hey, do you need a ride, kid? I can take you home if you want," the woman said in her car. At school, we were always told that we should never get into strangers' cars. I wanted to go home though. I didn't want to walk through the tunnel, and I figured that I could just get out on the other side of the tunnel and I would be fine, wouldn't I? I was convincing myself that it was a good idea. Without giving it much thought, I replied to the woman, "Yeah, please." Looking back on it now, she didn't know where I lived. She didn't know me, and therefore it seemed odd of her to offer a ride without knowing where she was supposed to be going. Had I had the presence of mind to think about it logically and calmly, I might have noticed the signs. Something was very wrong. But logical thought wasn't an option that day. I happily and stupidly got into that stranger's car. When I got into the car, it was warm, and actually what struck me first was the smell. It was horrible. It was an unusual smell in there, but I was comfortable. I felt relaxed. She pulled away and we entered the tunnel. I spoke to her in a meek voice and said, "Just the other side of the tunnel would be perfect, thanks. I live in one of those houses close by." She didn't react. She didn't say a word. She just remained silent. Initially, I thought that it was awkward, but then a very unsettling feeling crept into my mind. The abnormality of my situation just dawned on me. I realized that I could be in danger, and with that realization, cold sweat began to amass all over my body. "Actually, I think I'd like to get off here." This got a response from the strange woman. She looked over towards me and sniggered. And then the car sped up. Before we were traveling about the speed of a bicycle, but now the speed was increasing. A very serious and adult thought came to the forefront of my mind. If I don't get out of this car, I'm gonna die. I felt that as an instinct. Even though I was terrified, I forced my body to respond to my will. I've never felt fear like that before or since. I scrambled to open the door. I had no idea how fast the car was going, but if I had to guess now that I'm older, I would say it was going about 50 kilometers an hour, which is just over 30 miles an hour. Without hesitation, I opened the door and I threw myself out of it. I felt intense, severe pain all over my body as I clattered and rolled along the asphalt. I heard the woman scream something as she sped off. I raised my head to make sure she was gone, and I saw her smash into the guardrail. I hope she went over it and fell. We live in a mountainous area, and going through a guardrail would likely lead to going over the edge of the mountain. It could be fatal, and I hope that it was. I still do, by the way. That's the last thing I remember of that day. I woke up in a hospital bed. I found out later that a passing car found me unconscious inside the tunnel. He thought that it was a hit-and-run incident, so he called the emergency services to report it. I had a couple of broken bones and I was covered in cuts and bruises. I got a lot of time off school, but I was in a hospital, and hospitals were boring. My mum went nuts and insisted that I would never walk through that tunnel that far to school and back again. We even moved homes while I was in hospital. She really put her foot down. That was the last time I ever walked through that tunnel, and I'm glad it was. I heard this from a friend of mine who used to be involved with the JSDF. Hi, Jay here. The JSDF, or Jeitai, is the Japanese Self-Defense Force. It is essentially their army and navy, etc. The reason it's called a self-defense force is due to the surrender treaty during World War II. Japan are not allowed to have a military as such, but they are allowed to have a means to protect themselves, hence the name Self-Defense Force. Fun fact, my day job involves direct contact with the JMSDF. Oh, and math? Finally found a story for you, mate. Anyway, back to the story. There is an exercise that they do for the JSDF. I'm not sure I should be saying this, but I heard it from a friend of mine a while back, so it might not even be an active exercise anymore. Anyways, this exercise apparently simulates what it would be like to be in the middle of a war. The exercise would take place up in the mountains, and it would last for about 3 days and 4 nights. It sounded pretty intense. They would take turns on guard and sleep in shifts. During that time, there were these kind of bases dug into the mountains. You know, these spaces designed for soldiers to hide in, where they would be able to hide from the enemies, keep watch and take breaks. These hides were very well camouflaged, and it was all very authentic, despite it being a drill. One day during fall, a training exercise was set up. 2 soldiers in training were stationed outside, in the elements, to keep watch. However, come the middle of the night, the 2 soldiers in training would abandon their post. They ran into one of the hides speaking loudly, and this caught the attention of their supervisor. Their supervisor yelled at them for abandoning their post, and demanded an explanation. The soldiers in training could only tell their supervisor that they, quote, saw something. They both looked pale, and they were both said to be trembling. The supervisor demanded an answer, and he was told that the pair of them had seen a ghost. The other soldiers in the hide listened to their story with great interest, and it went something like this apparently. The 2 on guard said that everything was going smoothly. They had heard a rustling sound ahead of them that made them cautious though. At first, they thought the noise was being made by an animal, but when they really paid attention to the sound, they realized that it was the sound of footfall. They said it sounded like someone was walking around. It was several yards away, and it was dark out, but it wasn't pitch black. There was enough natural light to make out shadows and shapes. They say they saw a dark silhouette. in the shape of a human up ahead of them. During the exercise, capturing other team members was encouraged, so the two of them, at their post, decided to try and sneak up on the owner of that silhouette in an attempt to capture them. They snuck out and split up to approach their target from either side. They held their breaths as they crept up. They closed the distance between them and the silhouette to about 4 yards, and then they shouted out at their target. They shouted, "If you make any sudden moves, you'll be shot." They cocked their guns and aimed at their target. The silhouette just stood there, silently, without movement. There was no response. There were no lights on in the area, so one of them took out their flashlight, while the other kept his gun aimed. The flashlight was pointed at the silhouette and turned on, only to reveal no one there. Whoever was there was gone. And that was what caused those men to leave their post and come back to the hide. Upon hearing this, the supervisor responded with the following: "Good story, boys. Dawn's almost here, though. Time to face your fear. Back to your posts. That's an order." They tried their best to persuade the supervisor to allow them to stay in the hide or even transfer them to a different post, but he would not be swayed. A debate turned into a heated argument where threats were exchanged, but eventually the soldiers reluctantly left the hide and returned to their posts. They were said to be shaking with fear. There have been rumors of suicides in the dormitories and the barracks. Some have said that a soldier was once shot accidentally with a live round, right there in the training area. So who knows, maybe there was something substantial to their claims. My friend is convinced that the two who abandoned their post saw an apparition out there in the cold of fall that night. This happened when I used to work in a supermarket. A typhoon had been reported to be approaching our town, and that day there were a lot of customers entering the store from the morning onwards. I think they all wanted to get everything they needed before the heavy rain began to fall. That rainfall wouldn't begin until the evening, by the time it started to get dark out. It got darker quicker than usual, as it was autumn here. There were almost no customers coming and going by the time it was dark. I say almost no customers because some came in now and then, but nothing like a normal weekday night. I looked up as I was sorting out the shopping baskets to see a mother of about 30 and a girl about the age of 6 walk in. I greeted them quickly, and then went back to organizing the baskets by the entrance. While I was looking down, they must have walked into the store. By the time I was back inside, I saw them over by the vegetable aisle. Something was a little off about them to me. I will let you know what I found so off-putting. So, most people when they're shopping or browsing will look up and down the aisles at products, maybe even reach out to check some items. You know how to shop, I don't even know why I feel the need to mention it, but with that in mind, the mother and daughter was just pacing up and down the aisles without really looking at anything. They were just looking forward and slightly higher than the shelf line. They didn't even pick up a basket. I couldn't figure out the reason they came in here in the first place. They weren't even shopping. But then I thought to myself, hang on, they might be trying to steal something. It didn't look like they were, but there was definitely something up with a pair of them. I kept an eye on them as they passed through the meat section. Then suddenly they passed through the staff-only door next to the meat. I rushed over to them to let them know they shouldn't be back there, but by the time I pushed the door open, they were gone. I couldn't find them. It really looked like they had headed in there, but maybe I was mistaken. It played on my mind for the rest of my shift. I expected to see them at some point during the remainder of my shift, but I never did. As I was getting ready to leave for the night, I jokingly mentioned my encounter to the manager. I was expecting a laugh out of him, or for him to say something like, that's because you were tired and it was a slow day, but no, that's not what I got. That's not what he said at all. He took his glasses off, turned to me in his swivel chair and said, "I've seen them too. For some reason, sometimes when there's a typhoon, you see them. And there's others. They come in and enter that room near the back of the store. I didn't know what to make of it the first time I saw them. So I asked one of the employees. You won't know her, she's retired, she went before you joined. She told me that she thought that those two were the victims of a road traffic accident that happened not too far from here. Now, she said that accident happened about 15 years ago. Apparently the cause of the accident was down to the low visibility due to an approaching typhoon. Apparently they were on their way to our store. So they come back to the store when a typhoon is getting closer, possibly because they are tied to carry out the same task, as it was never completed. I don't know why they go to the back room there. Maybe the store layout was different before I joined. Do you know the crossroads? Just a little ways up from the loading area? Yeah, that's where they say that fatal accident took place. I'm not sure if this is all true, but it makes sense to me. And the other employees believed it. There are plans to completely renovate the store in the next year, and it makes me feel a little sad because I don't know what will happen to them. Where will they go? His story made me feel sad, but not scared. If I see them next time a typhoon approaches, I won't be scared. I wonder if there's something I can do, or should do, to show them the way. I wouldn't like to ward them off by blessing the area, or laying salt everywhere. I just want them to be at peace. Warning, this experience might not be appropriate for some viewers. Discretion is advised, as this one is pretty close to the bone. This happened when I was a newlywed. My husband and I went to visit his mother in his rural family home in Kyushu. He said that he was from a small town, but it was smaller than I ever imagined. Another reason we headed back to his hometown was because his father was in the hospital. My sister-in-law was a student, so she wasn't home to help, so that left his mother essentially home alone. And she didn't have a driver's license, so it made getting around the countryside very difficult. She could walk most places, and of course there were buses and taxis, but occasionally you just need a car, don't you? She needed a bunch of gardening supplies. We arrived in Kyushu on the Shinkansen. My husband would drive his mum around in his father's car. I was planning on going with them, but I suffer with anemia, and I almost collapsed on the train. When my mother-in-law saw me, she said that I looked pale, and she told me it would be better off if I stayed home. I didn't really mind that idea. My husband's room had been left the way it was since he graduated from high school. Same bed, same desk, etc. I got into bed and I shut my eyes. Now I should say that I'm a deep sleeper. I experienced and slept through the Great Hanshin earthquake, and I came out unscathed. Also, I have somehow slept through a 5.0 earthquake too. I had no idea it happened. I just turned on the TV in the evening and saw the news and I was like, whoa, did that happen? It was truly shocking. So there I was sleeping soundly on my husband's childhood bed for a while, I guess, before I began to feel slightly restless. I put it down to being asleep someplace different. You know, like when you miss the comforts of home, or you wake up in the middle of the night at a friend's place and you're confused and that initial thought is, where am I? It was a bit like that. I wasn't used to sleeping alone, so when I thought I sensed movement on the bed, I immediately thought that, my husband's back earlier than expected. I dreamily thought that he saw me sleeping, and he felt like joining me for a while. After a few moments, I felt like something was off. He was a little more ambitious, shall we say, with what he thought he could get away with at his parents' home. I was more than half awake at that point, and I knew something was wrong. I felt something moving beneath the covers, beneath my skirt. I felt a hand try to part my legs, and breath on my bare thighs. I opened my eyes, threw off the covers, and I saw that there was an old man on the bed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He saw that I was awake and immediately tried to overpower me. "I want to see what a city bitch's pussy looks like." That's what this guy said as he tried to grab at my clothing. At first I was speechless. I was in this stunned state. I couldn't believe it was happening. I couldn't scream right away, but then my brain kicked into gear. I leaned over to the bedside table, grabbed my phone, and dialed the number for the cops. I kicked at that old man with all my might, and he went toppling backwards off of the bed. I took my chance and I ran downstairs as fast as I could. I heard the old man cussing me and saying something else disgusting up there as he got to his feet. I bolted out of the front door and I ran across the street, where I was immediately spotted by another old guy who was washing his car. I was screaming. It was all horrible. I screamed at the old man for help, and then I just began to cry. The wife of the guy who was washing his car came out and ushered me into their home to take refuge while I waited for the police to arrive. While I was explaining the situation, my husband and mother-in-law returned home. As I was telling the police everything through tear-filled eyes and heavy sobs, the old man, the guy who got into bed with me at my mother-in-law's house, he came out of the house and just sauntered off down the street as if nothing happened. That didn't work out too well for him because he was instantly arrested. Now that my husband and his mother were back, they were able to tell me a few things about the old man, and it turned out he just lived up the street on the opposite side. He was living with his two 40-something-year-old sons who didn't work. He didn't work either. Apparently he had a young wife, but she doesn't live with him anymore. Wonder why, huh? It turned out that he was jealous of my husband and the life he had with me outside of the small town. He told the police that because I was from the city and wearing different clothing, I was, quote, glamorous, and I looked easy to him. He told the police that when he broke in, he had committed no crime. He was simply trying to ascertain if I was a hooker or not. Naturally, he was taken away in a police car, and we were planning on staying the night, but I didn't want to after that. I don't think I was being difficult by wanting to go home. Before leaving, my husband and his mother informed me that the old man was very important. He was a very important person in their town. I didn't care. What that man tried to do would have been irreversible. I was fully prepared to sue this man, but I was asked multiple times to find a more amicable resolution. They kept telling me that they wanted a peaceful end to the matter. I was aghast. It wasn't as simple as that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't get them to see that. In the end, there was no apology, no settlement, and no punishment for the old man, and I cried myself to sleep that night. Is this just something that happens in small towns? God, I hope not. Recently in the evenings, I've been hearing some kids playing hide and seek. I live in an apartment complex on the ground floor, and there are a lot of families with children who live in the building. I can often hear kids counting to 10 and asking, "Are you ready?" The kids seem to love to play hide and seek. They play it almost every night. In the day I can hear other games, but they seem to only want to play hide and seek at night. I can usually hear them the loudest from my bathroom window. So anyway, this experience took place only 2 nights ago. Not last night, but the night before. By the way, their hide and seek game never annoyed me. It was quite sweet to hear kids playing in the area. It reminded me of how safe the area I lived in was. So anyway, the other night I heard some girl counting in a quiet voice when I went into the bathroom. She was on 5. So she went, 5, 6. I was in a bit of a funny mood that night, I have to say, so I decided to call out of the window at the kids playing their hide and seek game. I decided to count in a deep voice, quietly out of my window, kind of covertly. I don't know what my plan was, but I felt like giving them a little scare, I guess. I mean, Halloween was right around the corner. I thought that they might get a little kick out of it, or it might be something they could tell their classmates at school about, or maybe they would just keep quiet when they were near my bathroom window. So I counted up where she left off. 7, 8, 9, 10, ready or not? Something like that. I don't know, it was lame. At that point, I couldn't hear the girl who was counting anymore. I guessed that I might have scared her off. I could imagine her running silently back to her friends. I smirked, thinking that. I turned to leave the bathroom. I went to pull the cord light and leave, but then I stopped in my tracks when I heard something. It was a whisper in my ear, and it went like this. Ready. It sounded like a little kid had just whispered ready in my ear. I'm an adult man, and it scared the hell out of me. It just really grounded me to my spot on the floor. I guessed that she must have been no older than middle school age. Probably younger than that, actually. It was a young girl's voice. That's for sure, and it was right in my ear. Actually, come to think of it, it wasn't impossible for kids of different ages to mix together and play. It just wasn't usual for this place. The younger kids seemed to play under the watchful eye of their parents. Those parents occupied the benches outside most of the day and evening. I was thinking at this point I had simply heard someone speak outside of the window, but when I really thought about it, I realized that I had heard it much closer than I had before. If the kids were playing close enough for me to hear it, like I heard it, then maybe I should have heard the crunch of gravel by my window. There's a gravel moat going around the building. If anyone was out there, I would have heard them. From the bathroom, surely. There was no real reason why I should hear that voice that close, but I did read once that if you are in the presence of spirits, then you can hear them close to your ear if they want to communicate. Maybe there is a spirit of some kid in my building who wants to play hide and seek until they're found. Or maybe I just have an overactive imagination or something. Anyway, it was really scary. This is a story from my high school days. My best friend used to tell me that she had the ability to sense the presence of the supernatural. You know, the sixth sense. I wasn't exactly scared of ghosts or the occult, but I didn't believe her either. My friend had a habit of over-exaggerating things at times. We ran together some evenings to lose weight, and one dark night in autumn, during our run, she said something like, "Hey, look over there at that road sign. Can you see him? He's right there." I looked, but of course I couldn't see anything. Or that is, I couldn't see what she was seeing. She probably thought that I didn't believe her when she talked like that. I'm guessing that she was seeing some kind of spirit. I can't say that I was jealous that I couldn't see what she could. I would just make half-interested agreement noises or give her non-verbal cues. However, all that did was encourage her to keep talking to me more about ghosts and spirits and the supernatural. One night my parents went away, and they left me home alone to house sit. I figured that it would be a good chance to invite my friend over to watch a movie. Since she is always going on about ghosts and stuff like that, I suggested that we should watch a horror film. No better way to spend the night home alone, hey? This was the late 90s and horror films were really popular. I managed to rent one, which was dubbed the scariest movie out at the moment. Back in those days, we only had VHS players, so it was a tape. Although the movie had been really scary, it hadn't been enough to make me scream or jump with fear. The mood of the movie was very eerie though, and atmospheric. It was creepy. It did live up to its reputation. I wish I could remember the title now. I continued watching the movie intently, trembling a little with some of the scenes. I could sense that we were getting close to the end of the film though. It was a particularly scary scene. Suddenly the lights went out, just like the lights went out in the scene in the movie on screen. I thought that there had been a power outage, but the video was still playing on TV. I screamed at this point. It was scary. Next, the video began to get all distorted. Then it felt like the whole house was shaking. I could literally see the furniture shaking in the glow of the TV. The strange thing about the situation was the fact that the ground wasn't shaking, so I knew it wasn't an earthquake. It seemed to be contained around the TV area. My friend was shouting, "I don't like it, I don't like it," while shaking her head from side to side. I just screamed. It was pretty much all I was capable of doing. After a couple of seconds, the shaking stopped, and then the screen went black. Then, there was the sound of the tape being rewound. I sat there stunned for a while, too scared to move or even check how my friend was doing. After a few moments, the lights came back on, and we just looked at one another. We couldn't bring ourselves to watch the rest of that movie, or even touch the remote. That night we slept with the lights on, in the same bed. It was too creepy. The following day, I returned the VHS tape to the rental store. I thought that the tape might be broken because of what happened the night before, but when the video store clerk inspected it, he didn't mention anything to me. As we grew up, my friend and I remained good friends, right up until I got a job. It was around that point in my life that she moved away, and we gradually lost touch. I still called her from time to time, but one day her number wasn't in service anymore. I haven't heard from her since that day. That was the only time our VHS player ever malfunctioned like that. I've always been curious about the ending of that movie, but I've never brought myself to try and find it and watch it, because the fear of the power cut, and that night, still feels fresh. I've thought about it for years, and I have an out there theory. The strange phenomenon that happened that day was not down to the electronics malfunctioning. I think it was the power of my friend. She was so frightened by the movie and she kind of just willed it to stop. Maybe I should have believed her about her sixth sense claims. After my mother passed away, numbers that had significant meaning to her seemed to appear frequently to me. For example, birthdays and anniversaries would appear in numbers in different areas of my life. It made me feel very happy. It felt as if she was still with us and watching over us. The numbers that made up her birthday appeared to me once, and I want to tell you about that experience. It happened when I was living in California. It was a couple of years ago, when the wildfires were really rampant. It happened in the fall of 2020. I was living alone at the time, and there was a lot of uncertainty and fear in the community when the wildfires broke out. We didn't know if we were going to have to evacuate or not. I thought about those wildfires all the time. It seemed too dangerous and so close. It was really scary. I wasn't sleeping well. There was a lot of smoke outside. The smell was so strong that I thought I would have to evacuate. It was scary not being an American national. If I lost all of my possessions, what would I do? Where would I go? Those kind of thoughts were constantly on my mind. It was the evening time when the smoke was so thick outside a decision needed to be made, and quick. The power suddenly went out, and when that happened, I was petrified. I was thinking that I had no choice but to leave. I would just have to worry about what would become of my life abroad after the fires were out. I carried as many of my possessions as I could to my car and prepared to evacuate. I walked back inside to do one last check and to say goodbye to the place, and after a couple of minutes the lights came back on, and the digital clock on the cooker was flashing. You know when the oven is turned off, like most electronics, when they come back on they're always flashing that default 000 time, right? Well, that didn't happen this time. I noticed it because it looked so out of place. I wandered over to the cooker and I saw that the numbers displayed there were in fact my mother's birthday. I took that numerical message to mean, you're safe here. I took it to mean everything will be okay here. I didn't take that as gospel, of course. I needed to check it. I turned on the TV, checked my phone to see if there was any news on the fires, and there was. Apparently the wind direction had changed, thus changing the path of the wildfire, and we didn't need to evacuate. I thought to myself, this is definitely a message from my mother. My mother was protecting me. The messages from my mother didn't end there. I've seen her numbers in other areas, such as the hospital, application forms, frightening bills. I'm really grateful, and I feel protected. And I guess I want to use this platform to say thank you.